We will begin our update period from our elected officials who have been asked to keep their updates concise to allow as much time as possible for questions. We'll begin with Senator Whitver.
Thank you, Rick, and I appreciate everyone coming out today and being a part of this conversation, and thanks, Mark, for the sponsorship from Snyder. We're heading down the final stretch here of the legislative session. We're scheduled to be done May 3rd, so just over a couple weeks left, and I think right now we're on pace to finish about on time. The last couple of years we've ran over by days or weeks at times, but if everything goes perfect, we can get done on time, but rarely does it go perfect the last couple of weeks, and so there's still a lot of major bills out there that we're going to be working on, namely the property tax bill that people have been working on all session, but we're really trying to get some agreement with the House on what we can do on property tax reform. So that will be a big part of the conversation the last couple of weeks. As far as the budget goes, we still haven't made a ton of progress between the House and the Senate on negotiating the final budget numbers. The budget bills are moving back and forth, but they're not agreed to, and so over the next, hopefully by Monday night, the Speaker and I can kind of agree on a total size of the budget so that we can start moving down and get all those budgets passed here in the next couple of weeks. So overall, I think things are going right on pace and going well, but there's still several things left to do. The one thing I do want to talk a little bit about is not affecting here in Ankeny as much as statewide, but some of the flooding that's occurring all over the state. And the governor has done a tremendous job, in my opinion, of being on the ground and understanding the significance and the dire circumstances of the floods, and especially southwest Iowa. And Monday, we're going to have a press conference with the governor and the Speaker to outline some of our proposals on what we can do right now to help those in need with the flood. And fortunately, over the last couple of years, through tough budget decisions, we have built up an accumulated surplus that we can use some of that money to help those flood victims. We're still waiting on $1.6 billion that Congress has to approve. The President has approved it, but Congress has been stalled in getting that money passed. But even if the Congress passes the spending for $1.6 billion for those in need because of the flood, that takes a long time for that money to actually get to Iowa. And so we're trying to put measures in place right now that can help those that have been harmed through that flood. And so we plan to release a plan on Monday and move forward with that for the time being. So I'll just pass it to John, and again, appreciate everyone being here.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator Whitver. First, I want to give everybody an update. Our chief clerk and former state representative Carmen Bowl had an aneurysm a couple weeks ago, and she's still in the hospital. She's going to have a recovery. That's really good news. I've talked to her daughter-in-law recently, who said that during the surgery she had a stroke, and it has impacted her motion a little bit on one side, but through therapy they expect that to recover, and it hasn't impacted her personality any. She's still happy and glad to have that chance to recover, as we all are for her, and wish her well. So I want to talk just a little bit about where we're at, follow up on what Senator Whitver talked about, our pathway out. The job that we go there for relates to policy and budget. And the part that I work with in my subcommittee is budget, and we have passed out of the House the Health and Human Services bill, the appropriation bill. That bill this year, between the general fund appropriation and the authority to spend the state or the federal resources that come here to Iowa, that bill exceeds $5 billion. Is huge what the Department of Human Services bill has become. My bill, my admin and regs budget passed. It's about $107 million. The RIF bill has passed. That's the proceeds, basically, that casinos pay for the right to have monopolies here in this state. And that amounts to $112 million. The transportation budget has passed. Education budget has passed out of the House. The ones that we have left to do are the Ag and Department of Natural Resource budget, the Economic Development budget, the Justice budget, and the final one will be the standings bill. And we've had a lot of conversation about those budgets that are left to go. They're ready. We just have to do a few more amendments or fine-tune them, and then they'll be presented on the floor. And I expect this coming week we'll have all those done, except standings. So we're moving pretty fast. We've had some interaction with the Senate on these budget bills, and we have an April ending in sight for the House. So that's good news for the taxpayer. One of the issues that is before the legislature, before the House, is a bill, House Study Bill 165, which basically talks about protection and transparency for property taxpayers. Here's the issue. Statewide residential property taxes since 2015 have increased 19%, while the consumer price index for the Midwest has gone up 3.7%. I've had a lot of emails. I've heard from a lot of folks in Ankeny, and I really hope today that we could foster a conversation and I could get more input on this bill. It's really important. So with that, I'll pass it on to Representative Matson. Thanks for everybody being here, and thanks for our sponsors.
Thank you so much to the Chamber for hosting and to all of you for being here. And John, I also just want to say thank you for the update on Carmen, because I know she's been in all of our thoughts too in the Chamber, and it's good to have an update and knowing that she's doing better and still has a happy attitude. That is always glad to hear. So we look forward to welcoming her back when she's ready. So please keep her in your thoughts. Yes, it's budget time. And so I just wanted to take a minute to talk a little bit about the Health and Human Services budget. We spent about 6 hours debating that yesterday in the House, and I have a whole lot of thoughts on it. I'll try to keep them brief. I'll say that, first of all, there are some really good things in this budget. There is $27 million more for, it's called nursing facility rebasing, but essentially if we just think about it as money for nursing homes, that's helpful. There is an increase of $1.5 million to help relieve DHS caseloads out in the field, so that is a really good positive first step. There's also an increase of about $550,000 for rural psychiatry training, also positive. And one thing locally that's positive is allowing Polk County to transfer funds within their county budgets to provide more flexibility in paying for mental health services. My frustration is that there's no new dollars to go along with it, because we are dramatically underfunded when it comes to mental health in Polk County, but at least there is some level of flexibility for that funding. So that's some of the good things, and it's a huge, huge budget, as John mentioned, and there's way more in that, and I'm sure there are a few more things that I'm also happy about, but I do want to take a few minutes just to highlight some of the things that I was not happy about and why I felt like I needed to be a no vote on this budget. First of all, there is no funding specifically dedicated for children's mental health core services. There is another $150 million supplemental from our current fiscal year that we're in for MCOs, and $11 million of that is for MCO incentives. So I find that really troubling. There's a lot of status quo funding in this budget, which concerns me because there is so much more need. And as an example, one of the things is where we're seeing some troubles is with the long-term care ombudsman. So since United Healthcare just announced that they are leaving the Medicaid program, which is 425,000 Iowans, 2/3 of our Medicaid population are now suddenly going to be without their provider or their insurance company, excuse me, and now there's just a great big shuffle. There is a ton of uncertainty in the system. People are understandably very frustrated. They're very scared. This is what I'm getting the vast majority of my emails about, are families who are struggling and they are scared. And so the long-term care ombudsman takes a lot of these calls, and they are just getting status quo funding. And so I think that's a problem when we're seeing spikes in need for services from our state agencies and they're not getting the money they need to help. And then really the big thing is that there is absolutely nothing in this bill that addresses Medicaid privatization and fixing the Medicaid mess that we're in. And I will tell you that Democrats yesterday offered 19 amendments. One of them was accepted, and 13 of them were ruled not germane. And what that means is we offered the amendment, the person who introduced it got up and spoke about it, and then they said, yeah, we can't talk about that. It ended discussion entirely. And when those amendments are things like addressing our long-term services and support population and getting them back under state control and saying that's not germane to the conversation, when we're talking about the budget that funds Medicaid, that's a concern to me, to not even allow the conversation. One of the amendments that I offered was on the Iowa Family Planning Network and going back to that to address family planning. That was ruled not germane. Family planning dollars are in this budget. How is that not germane? So these are the frustrations that I had yesterday, especially as a new lawmaker, when we aren't even allowing a conversation. And I know the process is boring to a lot of people, and so I appreciate you taking a couple minutes just to hear me out on this, but I think that it's important for people to know what the process is so that we are all involved, right, in our government. So thank you for taking a couple minutes to listen. Well, you know, you can't go anywhere. So that was basically what I wanted to highlight. And I do want to mention, again, that while this is a big budget, there also is a $30 million decrease in general funds for the Department of Human Services. So yes, there is more money for some things, not as much for others. I think it's important to take all of those things into consideration. And I will look forward to answering more questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Last month, I updated everyone here in a little more detail on the commercial and industrial growth and job growth that are experiencing out at Crosswinds Development at Corporate Woods out there. I think it was about $120 million worth of investments going to be coming in there in the short term, and those three projects are moving right along. I also updated people on the 2020 budget that we had just completed and the 40-cent reduction in our tax levy. That went well. This is spring as well. You wouldn't know it by today, but spring is here, and road construction will be starting pretty soon. I believe it's Monday. The Northwest Irvindale Drive between 1st and 5th will reopen for work again, and hopefully we'll get that completed. That was a project for the books there. We had weather that wouldn't give up on it, and they weren't able to finish it last year, so we should be getting that done pretty quick. Also, out of our capital improvements program, our street reconstruction program will be beginning. The largest one is the eastbound lanes of 1st Street from Irvindale to somewhere right around Countrywood Lane. That will be torn up significantly, similar to what the westbound lanes were last year. And then there's about two or three other significant reconstruction projects. Where they're at right now kind of escapes me, but then our patching program will continue on also. Some of the things that I've been spending my time on lately are a lot of regional initiatives and issues, and two of the larger ones are we've spent a significant amount of time dealing with regionalization, thank you, of the Des Moines Waterworks. We've spent a little over a year working on that, and we've had quite a few different meetings on that. It kind of stalled out for a little bit, and between David and I think our city manager, I think we got that jump started again, and the ball, so to speak, is in the Waterworks court to bring a proposal forward to the other member communities to get this regionalized. And there's two, I guess, important factors in doing that. One is all decisions right now are made by 5 people that are appointed by the mayor of Des Moines. And off the top of my head, maybe 60% of the sales of water are sold outside of the city of Des Moines. So we need to have more say in what happens there. But the larger issue is capacity. And with the growth that everyone is experiencing, we need to make sure that we've got capacity for the years to come. And by years to come, I mean 50, 60, 70 years to come. We need to keep an eye on that. So there are some discussions of other communities to the west possibly branching off and doing their own water treatment plants. I don't think that's the best idea. I think the best idea is to stay regional, or to create a regional entity to do that, and then create the new, there does need to be a new plant somewhere in the near future, but determining where that goes to serve the greatest amount of people and the most efficiently is part of what we're discussing. So that's ongoing. Myself and several other mayors are involved in that, and hopefully next year at this time I'll have some news as to what kind of successes we've had with that. And the second thing that myself, a lot of other mayors and managers are concerned about, working on, and discussing with our representatives is what Representative Landon mentioned a little bit ago, was the property tax bill that is being worked on in the Senate, and I'm not sure if there's a companion bill yet or not in the House, and I'm not sure if there's a companion bill yet in the Senate, but we have a lot of concerns about that. Personally, I'm all for property tax reform, but I don't believe this really addresses the reform. It more is a, for lack of a better word, a manipulation of the outcome, which really doesn't address how you get to the outcome. And I think during this session, I think myself and the city manager have had several very good and productive conversations with all three of our representatives to my left here, and we'll continue to work with them to try to make this, if this bill continues to go forward, we'll try to make it the best bill for everyone concerned, but we're all working together on this thing. So I'll be happy to take any questions later then.
Okay, thank you all. Just a reminder, there's to be no videos nor cameras at this event. We are doing this, of course, at the chamber, and it'll be available on the website. So that was a reminder I missed. Thank you, everyone, for the pertinent updates. We will now begin the question portion of today's update. We will take questions in order you signed up earlier, beginning with our first person's name. We would ask you to come to the mic, state your name and address before your question. We will be giving 1 minute. We would also ask you to ask a question. And the 1 minute will be enforced, so do not think by any means that we are being disrespectful if we do call for a question. So again, if you have something to state, if you just want to make a statement, you can do that afterwards. But if you have a question, please do so. Our first question will come from Sandy Wilson, and after that will be Chuck Soderberg, and Mark Land is the man with the mic.
Good morning. Thanks for being here. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here. So Steve's not here, but I wanted to see if maybe the Ankeny City Manager could speak to the property assessments that we all received in the mail, how they're calculated, and I guess I know how they're calculated because I'm going to ask, where does the market figure come from?
Gary, do you want to take that? It's up to you, I don't.
Well,
maybe they can tag team.
How it's calculated, I can't tell you, but what the Polk County assessor is required to do by state code is to appraise or assess properties at 100% of what they determine market value to be. Now, 95 to 100. Yeah. So how they're coming up with what that market value is, I don't know, and I don't know if David knows that either. But the assessor comes up with that, and there's residential, commercial, industrial, and agricultural, I believe. I don't think there's any others in there, but they all went, and multifamily, I guess, and they all went in different directions. I don't know that there's any rhyme or reason between your house and my house, depending on what happened to that assessment 2 years ago. But like I say, they're all supposed to be within 5% up or down of retail or of market value. And then that, of course, is a factor in what tax rate is applied to that.
one thing I would add is that what's important from the standpoint of how it affects taxes, because that seems to be the jump that people make as they open their assessment notice and automatically jump to taxes, is that the assessments that you got in the mail last week don't affect your property taxes that you'll pay until fiscal year 2021. So until you pay your taxes in the fall of 2020 and the spring of 21, those taxes are not affected by the change in assessment. So if your assessment went up 10%, that doesn't mean your property taxes will go up 10%. It doesn't mean your property taxes will go up at all. We will have an opportunity, the city will have an opportunity, as will the county, Broadlawns, DART, all of the taxing bodies, the school district, will have an opportunity to adjust their rates next year as part of their budget process. And when we go through our budgeting process, we will have that information and be able to, just as we did last year when we saw significant growth in assessments. That's why you saw the largest property tax reduction in the city of Ankeny's history. Part of that was because of the assessment increase. So the thing that I try to tell, two things I try to tell folks about assessments is, number one, it's part of the equation, but there's a step in between, and that is local elected officials have the opportunity to adjust their rates down before that does anything to your property taxes. And the second thing I always like to say is turn your bill over and compare your property taxes that you are paying now to last year and the year before and see who's doing what. That's the two things. It's a complicated issue, but it doesn't mean your taxes are going up.
And the other thing, whatever the assessed value showed on that assessment notice that you got is not what the tax rate is applied to. That assessment notice then has a rollback calculation applied to that, a homestead credit taken off of that. So you can't just take your levy rate times whatever that assessment notice was.
It is amazing as that was being reported on the news that those kind of things are not covered. That's what makes these great. I couldn't turn my bill over because I fainted, but
can I add into that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to say that. Anyway, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I appreciate the question. I'm not surprised that's the first question because it's something that we've heard about daily since the new assessments have come out. And, you know, property tax is a really frustrating thing because you're probably, just like I am, confused at the whole conversation of rollback and percentage and all, you know, all the different levies. And so it is frustrating to know who to blame. Do we blame the assessor? Well, he's doing his job because state law says you need to assess the property at 100% of market value. So all he does, he'll come out to your neighborhood and he'll say, what would your house sell at? And if it's, you know, $300,000, that's what he assesses it at. And you have a chance to appeal that by saying, all my neighbors with similar houses sold their houses and they didn't get that much, so mine shouldn't be that. But in general, he's just trying to put the assessment at what the fair market rate is if you could sell it. And so there were times where I'm mad at the assessor. But then I think what we really are trying to focus on this year is adding some transparency to the whole process. Because just because everyone's assessment went up in Ankeny doesn't mean the city and the county and every other levy needs to capture all of that growth and all of those property tax dollars. And so the concept on the bill we're working on is you can automatically capture a certain amount, say it's 2%. And so you take your budget from last year and you can grow it by 2%. You can also add in all the new construction. You know, if we're putting a whole new neighborhood in North Ankeny, well, that wasn't here last year. We need to have fire services and police services. So we don't want to create a situation where we're de-incentivizing growth or holding back growth. So you want to let them capture that. But more than anything, it's so if the levy, and Ankeny, to what David said, Ankeny's credit, the city council and the mayor have done a pretty good job of lowering our levy as all these assessments come in. Not every community is like that. What they do is they send out a release. They say, great news, guys, your levy is staying the same this year. And everyone says, great, my taxes aren't going up. Well, if your assessment went up $40,000, your taxes are going up. And so there's this whole confusion in the whole process of who am I supposed to blame? And so the concept behind the bills we're working on is after the assessments come out, you recalibrate the levy for the city council. So if last year the levy was 10, but they have all this assessment, to get the same budget number, we recalibrate the levy for you, so maybe it's $950. And then you get a little bit of growth on that, to 2%. And then if you want more growth than that, you have to go and take a vote and tell everyone in this room and tell all the taxpayers, we want to capture more of that. And hopefully it provides a lot more thought in the process, as opposed to just, great, we grew, the assessments went up, we got all this new money. And so really it's more about transparency than anything, and we're working through the details on it, but I think it's really important because it is a confusing issue and everyone's mad about it. And so we're trying to do our best to work on that issue the next few weeks.
Yeah, thanks. I would remind everybody that there is, first of all, an appeal process. You need to be aware of that with your notice of what your valuation is of your property. And 40% of the people that apply for a hearing on that receive some consideration in that process. It can go up, it could go down, but it does work. It is there for people to go through that process. And so be aware of the dates of that, because it's important. I don't have them with me here today, but it's coming right up. And there is a board that hears your case one by one. They will hear those, and you'll have a chance to make your case of why your particular property might not have the right assessment at this time. Secondly, I want to address it, and we have a member of the Ankeny School Board here, Jim Ford, and there's been discussion that somehow this impacts retirement funds for state employees, whether it's IPERS or the 411 system or whatever system is pertaining to that particular employee. There's about as much choice for municipal, county, and state government to change or not fund those as you business owners have of not paying, or individuals, self-employed, of paying your Social Security. There isn't any choice. It gets paid, and it's a #1 issue on payroll. It's not negotiable. It's not a possibility that that doesn't get funded. So the discussion that somehow a property tax bill will impact those systems is completely false, and it's just meant to scare people. And we hear that over and over and over. And I want to emphasize that. There is no chance that this bill or discussion relates to IPERS or the 411 system or any state retirement system. So that said, I think the issue is I laid out the growth in taxes and the CPI. I think Senator Whitver was very clear in what happens when you have an assessment increase. It doesn't necessarily increase your taxes, but there's a levy system. And if you look on your tax statement, all the people that have levy authority on that are listed. The state of Iowa takes less than 0.5% of property tax. 99.5% is for your local governments. And so it's important for you to be informed and to interact with your local representatives, which you're doing here today. City council members certainly have something to say about the municipal. School boards certainly have something to say about the school budgets. And we've tried to give the state of Iowa, through the legislative process, has tried to give school boards much more say in how they spend and what they spend their money on, and use funds that have been tied up in particular items in silos where they can't get to it for other purposes. We've tried to untie those so they can use the funds as best they can. And we still have a property tax issue. And it's not alone to Iowa. We are continuing to hear from Nebraska folks about huge problems over there with property taxes, farmers selling their land in Nebraska and moving to Missouri. And I can give you just a real quick review of taxes. Property tax in Missouri on farmland is about $4 or $5, maybe $6 an acre. In Iowa, if you don't include buildings, just raw land, it runs by productivity, but for the most cases, it's probably $25 an acre. Some cases more, some cases less. Minnesota, Nebraska, probably $75 an acre. It's a real impact. Businesses are the same thing, and we've tried recently to do, we didn't try, we did roll back on commercial property taxes because we feel job growth is just very, very important in this state. If your kids don't have a chance for a job, if you don't have a chance to improve yourself through a better job, what are we doing here? We need that opportunity, and we continue to foster that with property tax rollbacks, and the state is funding those, so it's not an impediment on the other taxing authorities, and we've tried to make them whole. And I wish that Supervisor Van Ort was here today. We just dearly would love to hear from the Polk County perspective on this. But at this time, I don't have any more. Unless you have questions, I'll turn it over to Representative Matson.
Thanks, John. So I don't have anything necessarily to add to the assessor stuff, but thank you for the question because it was a good one, and I think there's been a good conversation about that already. I do want to touch on the other bill that's been talked about, which was HSB 165. The number now is HF 773 for anyone who is keeping track. So my concern is that I don't think there is an intention to harm IPERS or other retirement security. But my understanding of the bill is that it switches the way local governments pay for retirement services, including IPERS and 411. So putting them in the general fund, which otherwise pays for basic services like police, fire, libraries, parks, trails. You know, when you just think of what does your city government pay for. And so what the plan does is that it puts a limit on the amount that local officials can raise to pay for those basic services, even in the cases of natural disasters. And my concern is that if there's a problem with resources at some point, then it's going to put local municipal governments in a really tough position of having to pay for, like, okay, are we going to pay for basic services like fire, like our libraries, all of those things, or retirement services? That's my understanding and that's my concern. And I'm already concerned about that we've had workers that have been penalized in the last few years regarding what's happened with collective bargaining. I worry about things getting worse, and I'm worried about retirement security for police officers and firefighters. So I have a lot of pause with this bill, and I've also had conversations with the mayor about it, and I have really taken those to heart. So thanks for listening.
Just a couple quick comments, and then we can move on unless other questions about this. But a couple of things that have been said that I just wanted to comment on. Jack mentioned that the city's done a good job of decreasing that property tax levy, and I think we have. In the last 6 years, we've reduced the levy by $1.68. The school district for the last 8 years has reduced the levy by $4.83, and that $1.68 with the city represents a little over $13 million that the city did not take in property tax revenue. I mean, we left that on the table, gave that back to the taxpayer. I did have a conversation with Jackie Black, the school CFO, and I don't know that we got apples to apples comparison, but that $13 million that the city did not capture, the school district's number has got to be significantly larger than that. The school district has a larger taxing district than the city does. Their school district goes outside the city limits, and they have a higher tax rate than the city does, so their multiplier is larger. So I don't know what that number is, but it's larger than that. So just, you know, it's got to be combined $30–40 million or so of tax revenue that was not captured by either the school or the city. And then another thing that, you know, everybody likes to talk about taxes and they think they're too high. But one thing I try to encourage people to think about is their level of appreciation for what those taxes buy, whether it's through the school district or whether it's through the city. I mean, you're driving on streets, kids are going to nice schools, being taught by good teachers. There's a myriad of things that everybody knows that's what they're going for. But if you're not thinking about that, at the same time that someone's complaining about property tax, I think it needs to be considered. And then John mentioned a few of the taxing authorities that make that up. And unless I'm leaving one out, you've got city, school, county, Broadlands Hospital. There's a small aviation levy for the airport, and then DMAC. So,
DART.
And DART, yes. And
colleges.
Yeah, I said that, yeah.
And conservation through the Iowa State.
Yeah, so there's a lot of entities that affect that final number that shows up for your house. And again, along the lines of what Ankeny's doing is the $120 million worth of investment that I mentioned earlier and then last month that's going to be taking place out at Corporate Woods. Taxes were not an issue for them on that $20 million or $120 million investment. And we're bringing, off the top of my head, somewhere between 500 and 600 jobs to Ankeny, and roughly 400 to 500 of those are new to the state of Iowa. And that particular company had quite a few options that they went to. So I think a combination of what all four of us up here are doing is making the area boom. So.
Thank you. Chuck Soderberg, you're next. And then after that, Jan.
Good morning, good afternoon. Chuck Soderberg, 502 Northeast 28th Street. The question that I have is relating to a utility fixed cost recovery bill, Senate File 583, which was passed out of the Senate. Thank you, Senator, for your support. House File 669 is under consideration in the House. It's being misled. This isn't a sunshine tax. It's not a tax at all. It's really the ability for a utility to collect the true cost of electric service. Right now, we subsidize as electric service providers charge us. Right now, they are not being able to collect the true cost of that electric service. I use the comparison of the electric vehicle fuel excise tax bill. That's an opportunity for electric vehicles to pay for the use of the roads. Currently, they're not paying anything for.
So your question is?
The question is, I want to know your view on the consideration of the fixed cost recovery bill.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you, Chuck. As Chuck said, it's already passed the Senate. I did support it. I just think it's important to what I would call grid equity. If everyone's using the grid, everyone should pay the fee to support that grid. Because long term, the problem becomes if more and more people are on solar, and less people are putting in the grid, that means the people that aren't on solar are paying more. And so when there's not that many people on solar right now in Iowa, I think it's important to make a long-term policy decision to say, as more and more people come onto solar, we all should be paying for it. And I think Chuck's example of electric vehicles is right. We all pay a gas tax every gallon you put in your car. People with electric cars don't pay anything to upkeep the roads. It's not a big deal right now because there's not that many electric cars. At some point in the future, it might be 10 years, it could be 50 years, but there will be a lot more electric cars on the road. And so the question is, do we charge a fee for that? And so I did support that in the Senate.
Yeah, so this is an issue that is under consideration in the House, and I think it's stalled in the House right now. I don't think that there's enough votes to bring it out to the floor for full debate or for a vote on it. It's an issue that Alliant Energy in eastern Iowa has more to do with, I think, with higher rates. Maybe much higher rates than what Mid-American has. And this is only for regulated utilities. So rural electric cooperatives, as I understand it, are not part of this issue. It has to do with the big two, which is Alliant and Mid-American. And they do not charge at this point for that interaction. So basically picture a meter running both ways. If you're using energy off the grid, they're charging you for it. And if you're producing more with your solar unit, it goes back into the grid, the meter runs the other way and it takes off your bill. It doesn't quite work that way, but that's a pretty good analogy of it. We've got we've got, as I understand it, we have 4 residences here in Ankeny that have solar. And so it's not really an issue here in this particular area. But I think it will be because, as Chuck thoughtfully provided, the electric cars, that's a big consumer of electricity. And there isn't enough electric grid, there isn't enough infrastructure in Ankeny or in any community if everybody has an electric car, and especially if you want to do a rapid charge. So there you might need 220 volts or more. And if everybody put that in their house, I mean, well, it's over. I think we probably go like Venezuela and just black out. I don't know. So certainly there's a need for more power generation as we go forward if we go this route. And as I understand it, talking to the automobile dealers, just about every company has a lot more electric vehicles in the process of being engineered and coming out with them. I think that GM representative told me that they have something like 29 different electric vehicles under consideration that they're engineering right now. So by 2030, things are going to look different, and we're going to need to change how we do electric. And I don't know if this is the right avenue for us to start with. Some of the discussion has been it creates an opportunity for the large to have massive solar farms and become the provider of solar energy, and that the small individual homeowner really won't be able to afford because they just can't compete with that. And since they control the electric grid and the cost of it, you know, those charges, whatever we set out now statutorily or however we do that, the Iowa Utility Board certainly weighs in on these issues, but it's all fluid. You know, charges going forward can change, rates can change. And I think that we're really trying to get a handle on the whole concept of this. This is a small piece of it, but it's very important. And right now, as I said, that legislation is stalled in the House, but it's one that wants to move if we can get enough votes together to do it. So right now, we need to hear from consumers, and we've been hearing from some, but not a lot. So maybe that's because we just have 4 here in Ankeny. Anyway, I'll pass it on. Heather.
Thanks for the question. I'll be very straightforward with you. We're going to agree to disagree on this one. I have a lot of thoughts on this topic. We talked about it a lot at the last forum as well. And, you know, first of all, as it's been said, we need to think about how we do energy differently in this country. Solar, wind, electric cars, all of these things, they are good for our country, they are good for our state, they are good for our economy. Businesses that are here in town that do solar installations, the businesses across the state that do solar installations, they are good paying jobs. They are helping build a renewable future. I want to make sure that when we think about bills like this or anything related to economic development, that we are thinking about what's going to help grow our economy in a sustainable way that is environmentally friendly, you know, taking all of these factors into account. I feel like this is a really bad bill for a couple of reasons. Number one, we are in currently year 2 of a 3-year pilot project on this very topic to figure out if, you know, what are the actual benefits of solar? Does net metering work? You know, all of these pieces. And I believe very strongly in following the data, right? So what this bill does is that it completely not gets rid of the pilot project, but just completely takes no interest and disavows what the outcome of that is going to be. And so I believe in following the data. I say, let's figure out what's going to happen. Let's get all of that in and then reassess. I believe that we're going to be happy with the outcome of that. But maybe I'll be proven wrong, right? Let's have a conversation when we have the evidence and have the data instead of cutting off the discussion right now. The other piece is that when we talk about investments in solar, in the way Mid-American and Alliant are approaching this conversation is that they are only talking about the cost to them. They are not talking about the benefits they are getting by the private investments that individuals and businesses are making to do solar installations on their homes, on their barns, you know, their businesses. They are only thinking about what they are getting, or they are paying, not what they are getting back. So let's say you've got solar panels on your roof, and you, by the way, do have to pay to get hooked up into the grid. It's not like people, you know, in Prairie Trail where I live are just living off the grid over here with their solar panels. No one lives off the grid in Prairie Trail. Really, pretty much anyone in town. So you're still getting your bills, you're still paying them. All of these things are still happening. But one of the great things that's happening here too is that you're collecting all of this extra energy that you're getting from the sun. Yay, this is wonderful. And not only are you having lower costs because of it, but when you have extra energy built up, you are essentially giving that back to Mid-American so that it can go to your neighbor's house. Because you know what costs less? Energy and electricity moving from one house to the next than from a giant solar array, you know, from one county to another. The farther it has to travel, the more expensive it is. So being able to help your neighbors through net metering, that's a good thing. And to talk about what Mid-American can or can't do at any given point in time, Mid-American or Alliant could go to the Iowa Utilities Board tomorrow and ask for permission to build a solar array. There is nothing stopping them from trying to do that. So if they want to, all the power to them. But don't penalize individuals who have made expensive private investments, right? And businesses that are small businesses in particular that are working to build out this industry.
Okay, Jan, you're next, and then we've got to be done at 1. So we're going to try to get to Nora after that.
Hello, my name is Jan Brown, and I live at 2521 Northeast 97th Place here in Ankeny, and I want to thank you for being here and allowing me to come and having a nice sandwich for free. I'm representing Amos. Amos is a group of, it's an advocacy organization that is nonpartisan, represents 7 churches here in Ankeny. Senator Whitver, last year when you ran your campaign, you ran on securing more access to mental health services. And I heard that throughout the state, more access to mental health services. When we met with you in February, Jack Whitford was very cordial and allowed Amos leaders to meet with him in his office and speak.
And your question is?
Am I at a minute?
Yes, ma'am, you get 1 minute.
Okay, I'm at a minute. Okay, what are you going to do in the next 3 weeks to fulfill your campaign obligation, and what are you, Representative Landon and Representative Matson, going to do to help him?
Thank you.
Well, we did talk about mental health in the campaign, and part of that was the complex needs bill that we talked about a lot last year that we passed in a bipartisan, unanimous manner last year. We were happy to pass that last year. Coming back with children's mental health this year, the governor has put together the first step of children's mental health. I expect that we'll get that passed this year. The big question is the long-term sustainable funding. And our caucus has been working very hard on a plan that will eventually get mental health out of property taxes altogether. We've talked about property taxes. One of the big pieces of mental health of property tax is a mental health levy. That's how we fund mental health in the state of Iowa. Where not very many states fund mental health with property tax. So we have a plan. It's a complicated plan, but it's a plan to get mental health out of property taxes altogether over a period of time, and phase that in so where the state is now paying for mental health services, not property tax. met with the governor and the House. Whether we get that done this year or not is still very much up in the air. I think with the reserves that most of the regions have, I think we probably have one more year to get it solved, but the plan is pretty much done in the Senate, but getting agreement with the House and the governor will be the difficult part.
Yeah, I certainly echo what Jack has to say about the process. My take is that in the House, it's a very live issue that we've supported every year and continue to expand and try and provide those services. And I think it's a very complex issue, and there's a lot of people working on it, Jan, and I expect that we will have a slower progress than what you want, but we are steadily moving towards better and more available services, and we'll continue that march.
I'll just say that I look forward to seeing the bill so I can read it and have any idea what the proposal is going to be, because number one, I'm in the House, and so I haven't seen it yet, and number two, I'm in the minority, and so I haven't seen it. I am open to any number of different options when it comes to funding mental health. I think that we have to be willing to think outside the box and have these conversations. And certainly question, is our property taxes the right way to do it? I don't know, right? Let's talk about that. My concern, and some of the concerns that I've heard from others that have really thought long and hard about this, is that while we're not necessarily always happy with the way it's done with property taxes, that is, it's a number that you know is coming, right, year after year. It's something you can plan on, and you see how it's coming and, what to expect. If you take it out of that and put it into a state appropriation, state appropriations can change from year to year, right? So it might start off as saying, great, we promise that we will do exactly the same dollar amount that's funded by property taxes, and we'll just pay for it in a different way so it'll be fine. But what happens if the next year they say, oh, except this year we're going to do less? And so that's my concern. That doesn't mean I don't want to have the conversation. It's just something that I want to make sure that everyone's thinking about when we think about all of the different ways something can be paid for.
Thank you, Jan. Nora, I think this is going to be our last question, because I think we're going to run up against the 1 o'clock hour. So 1 minute, Nora.
I'll work on it. My name is Nora Brenneman. I live at 1205 Southeast Rio Drive. I moved to Ankeny in 1972. That's 47 years for those of you who aren't math whizzes. So I've lived here a long time, and I've seen a lot. I've been proud to live in this city. One of the things I've been proud of is the partnership with the school district. I think that the city and the school district have worked really well together over the past few years. We're growing, which is kind of good and bad. The school needs more space. I was really sad to lose the YMCA because I thought that was a bragging point. West Des Moines has one, Des Moines has one. Ankeny used to have one, we don't have one anymore. And then the district wants the Neville Center back, and there's lots of really good programs there, New Horizons, a congregate meal site, the Take, which is a clothing exchange program, and being a senior citizen, have been there, and they have quite a community at the Neville Center, and I'm worried about them.
So your question is?
My question is, I timed that perfectly. Anything, Gary, that you can tell us about the plans for the programs at Neville?
The only thing I can tell you about the plans for the programs there is the congregate meal site. We've been discussing off and on for several years about the possibility of the city building a senior center. And one of the functions in there would be the congregate meal site, which is actually paid for and operated by Polk County. And we're currently in negotiations with Polk County to see if we can get that done. As far as the rest of the services there, I don't know all of them that are in there, but they're all noble services. They're all some sort of a nonprofit with different levels of financial capacity. The city is not in discussions on dealing with that. The schools I guess fortunately are growing and providing another program that needs to occupy that space. They've chosen to refurbish that space. And there's, you folks have had discussions about that. There's a couple of other groups in Ankeny that are discussing some of these services and what can happen with some of these services. And all of them tend to point back to the city, that the city should take this over. Well, when we have core services that the city provides, we provide police and fire, we provide water and sewer, we provide parks and recreation, we provide transportation through streets and a variety of other things. And all of those core services are strategically planned throughout the city. And we've not had any strategic discussions on entering that field, and there's nothing scheduled for that at this point. So as far as what happens to those agencies that are in there, I think some of them, or the food pantry has more or less solved theirs. I believe they're out in the name of the business, but we were there. I can't even remember it now. Across the interstate, they've solved their problem. Pardon? Yes, impact. The others are working on them, and whether the churches are able to step up and provide some of that space or services, or just where it's going, at this point I don't know. But at this point, those services are not a core element of the city services. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but.
Okay, so here's the deal. We're going to take one more question, but we're going to be maybe we can.
Well, I'll be brief. I do recall that Supervisor Van Oort talked about an appropriation from Polk County to build a not a retirement center, a senior center up here. And so hopefully that's something that's on the horizon, that's coming. Been nice if it would have been coordinated, but it wasn't. I would want to say, and I wouldn't want to miss this opportunity, the Ankeny School District has considerable growth needs and projections, something to the tune of $50 million in infrastructure coming. And if you want to talk about a property tax issue, there's a property tax issue to talk about here in Ankeny. And we have passed the SAVE, the extension of the 1% sales tax out of the House, and I view that as one of the most critical issues here in the potential growth of Ankeny and the continued support that citizens are providing and sharing that equally, because property tax isn't always necessarily the right venue to support education and education needs. I think that all citizens have a share in that, and certainly a sales tax option is a way forward that I feel that people that I visit with here in Ankeny feel is the right path forward. So our bill extended that to the year, I believe, 2050, and we're continuing to work on that. I don't know if Senator Whitver wants to add anything on that, but.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to echo what John said. I am really happy with what we've done with SAVE in the House, that is extending the current penny sales tax that already exists. And one of the things that actually happened with the House bill, that Democrats and Republicans came together supporting this in a very bipartisan way in the House, recognizing the importance of getting this passed, not only for Ankeny, but for really every single school district in this state, because it is, I know from having conversations with folks like outside of SSA and just straight up school funding, this is their most important priority. One of the things that we did in the House to hopefully help it move in the Senate is that there is a property tax component. There always has been a property tax relief component of SAVE, which I did actually know before getting to the legislature. In the current version of it that exists right now in law, that's about a 2% portion of those funds is property tax relief. When we passed it out of the Education Committee, we had it at a 12% property tax relief. We amended it on the House floor, all of us supporting it, to get to 15% property tax relief. So please keep that in mind as you're thinking about property taxes as a whole. But we recognize that this is something that matters to our friends in the Senate. And so Right now, the bill, we passed it out of the House a month ago. It has been in Senate Ways and Means. It finally had a subcommittee meeting a week ago and passed out of that, and it is still in Senate Ways and Means. So I would just encourage you to talk to our friends in the Senate to get them to move it out of Senate Ways and Means and to the Senate floor.
I think that's a pretty good update of what's going on in the Senate. So, and the only thing I would say is the Senate Ways and Means Committee is taking a look at it that we want to make sure that we're balancing as you extend the penny sales tax over another 20 years. That's a lot of money coming into infrastructure. So in the Senate Ways and Means Committee, they are trying to balance the property tax relief that Heather brought up with the needs for infrastructure. And to look 20 or 30 years out in the distance, we want to make sure that extending the tax that far, it's done in the proper way and balances property tax relief with infrastructure needs. And so whether they keep it at 15% or change it, I don't know. I asked them to meet yesterday. So the Ways and Means Committee met in what we call a caucus, a meeting to discuss their path forward. And I'll probably get that update Monday on what they're considering.
Thank you all. First of all, I want to thank you all as well for attending today. We'd also like to thank our sponsors who provided a wonderful lunch, and for us Catholics, egg salad and tuna. Bless you all. This is the final legislative update of 2019. We would again like to thank all of our elected officials for their commitment to our members and community and appreciate their attendance at the legislative updates. Please join us on Monday, April 29th at 5 p.m. at Mistress Brewing Company for Pints and Policies. Again, how about joining me in thanking our elected officials for the work and the generous commitment they give